A little boy ran into a stranger on the beach, and his waitress mother pulled him away with a quick apology, thinking nothing of it. What she didn't know, the stranger was one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the city. And that single accidental moment on the beach was about to change both their lives forever. The ocean doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you run 3 cities, if men twice your size flinch when you walk into a room, or if your name alone is enough to end negotiations before they begin. The waves keep coming. The tide keeps rising. And when Ethan Cole stood at the edge of Blackwater Beach with his shoes still on, the Atlantic looked at him the same way it looked at everyone else. Like he was nothing. He'd been in Seagrove for 4 days and hadn't spoken to a single person. That was the point. Chicago was loud with sirens, with arguments, with the constant hum of a life he'd built brick by brick over 15 years. But 3 weeks ago, that life had cracked open like a fault line. First, it was Marcus, his most trusted lieutenant, found feeding information to the Calloway faction. Then, the engagement ring he'd picked out himself, the one sitting in his jacket pocket for 6 months, never made it to Elena's finger, because Elena was the one who told Marcus what to feed them, the woman he loved, the man he trusted most, both gone in the same night. So Ethan came to Florida, not to heal, not to think, just to be somewhere that didn't remind him of either of them. He walked the beach every evening at dusk, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. It was the 1 hour a day he didn't feel like a loaded gun with the safety off. He was halfway down the shoreline when it happened. Something hit him hard in the back of the knees. Small, fast, completely out of nowhere, and Ethan stumbled forward, barely catching himself before face-planting into wet sand. He spun around, already tense, every muscle coiled from years of never being caught off guard. A boy, maybe 6 years old. Big brown eyes, wild dark hair, a kite string tangled around both wrists like a cartoon accident. He'd been running full speed, chasing a kite that had nosedived into the wind, and he'd run directly into the back of a 6'2" man without seeing him at all. "Sorry," the boy squeaked, breathless, completely unafraid. Ethan stared down at him. He hadn't been this close to a child in years. He didn't know what to do with them. His world had no room for softness. He was about to say something short and walk away when the boy reached up to unwrap the string from his wrist, and the sleeve of his t-shirt pulled back. Ethan stopped breathing. There, on the inside of the boy's left wrist, was a birthmark. Small, distinct, shaped unmistakably like a crescent moon, slightly curved, sitting just below the base of his palm. The world went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, the kind that comes from shock. The kind that hits you like a wall and leaves you standing there, unable to move, unable to process what your eyes are telling you. Daniel, his younger brother, gone for 12 years, disappeared at 19 during the ugliest period of Ethan's rise, when enemies were everywhere and loyalties were thin. Ethan had looked. God, he had looked. For 2 years, he'd torn apart every lead, every rumor, every ghost of a trail. And then one day, he'd made himself stop, because looking was the only thing keeping the grief fresh. Daniel had the same birthmark, same wrist, same crescent shape. Ethan used to tease him about it as a kid, called it his pirate scar. "Mister, are you okay?" The boy was looking up at him with a slight frown, the kite string now loose in his hands. Ethan forced himself to breathe. "Yeah," he said. His voice came out rough. "I'm fine. Noah." The voice came from behind, firm, tired, and moving fast. A woman in a faded blue apron jogged toward them across the sand, sneakers half untied, dark hair escaping whatever she'd tried to do with it. She looked like someone who hadn't sat down since morning. She grabbed the boy's shoulders and pulled him gently back, putting herself between him and Ethan in one practiced, instinctive move. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "He got away from me. He does this with the kite. I've told him 100 times. "It's fine," Ethan said. She looked up at him then. Tired eyes. Brown. "Careful. Are you sure? Did he knock you down?" "No," she exhaled. "Noah, what do we say?" "Sorry," the boy said again, this time with a small smile that pulled something strange in Ethan's chest. The woman, Noah's mother, clearly, nodded once at Ethan, then turned and walked her son back toward the cluster of lights at the end of the beach. A small seafood shack, its sign half-lit and swinging in the wind. Ethan stood there long after they disappeared through the door. His mind was racing. His hands, usually the steadiest things about him, were not entirely still. Same wrist, same mark, same exact shape. It was probably nothing. It had to be nothing. He looked down at his own hands, then back at the door they'd walked through. He told himself to go back to the rental house, told himself to forget about it. He stood there for another 20 minutes. Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the rental house until 3 a.m. with a glass of whiskey he barely touched, staring at his phone. On the screen was a photo. Old, slightly grainy, scanned from a physical file he kept locked in a safe back in Chicago. He'd had his assistant forward it hours ago without explanation. It was Daniel, 16 years old in the picture, laughing at something off camera, his left arm resting on a porch railing. The birthmark visible, clear as a signature. Ethan zoomed in until the image blurred, then set his phone face down on the table. He was a man who built his entire life on facts, on evidence, on never making a move until he knew exactly what he was walking into. Sentiment was a weakness he'd surgically removed from his decision-making years ago. So he told himself he wasn't going back to that beach shack because of a feeling. He was going back because he needed more information. That was all. He arrived at the shack just before 10 in the morning, when the breakfast crowd was thin and the sun was still low enough to be gentle. He chose a corner table near the window, old habit, with a clear sightline to both the entrance and the kitchen pass-through. He ordered black coffee and eggs he had no intention of eating. The shack was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Wooden walls, fishing nets hung for decoration, laminated menus that hadn't been updated in years. The kind of place that had been there for decades and would be there for decades more, completely unbothered by the world outside. She appeared from the kitchen at 10:15. Lily Harper moved through the diner like someone running on a very short fuel supply. Efficient, quick, no wasted steps. She remembered orders without writing them down. She refilled coffee before anyone asked. She handled a difficult customer at the counter with a patience that looked well-practiced, never raising her voice, never losing the thin, professional smile. She was good at her job. That much was obvious. Ethan watched her the way he watched everyone, clinically, cataloging details. The tiredness around her eyes that even a smile couldn't hide. The way she kept one ear tilted toward the back, toward the sound of Noah, who was seated at a small table near the kitchen with a coloring book, eating cereal. A woman doing 2 jobs at once, working and mothering simultaneously, without a break between them. Noah. The boy was quieter this morning than he'd been on the beach. Focused on whatever he was coloring, his small tongue pressed to his lower lip in concentration. He had his mother's eyes, but not her stillness. There was something restless in him, even when he was sitting. An energy that wanted to be somewhere else. Ethan recognized it. Daniel had been the same way as a child. Always moving, always chasing something just out of reach. He pulled his gaze away before Lily could notice him staring. He stayed for 40 minutes, paid in cash, left a tip that was too large for the bill, but not large enough to be memorable. Then he walked to his car, drove 2 blocks, and called a number he trusted more than almost any other. "Ray," he said when the call connected, "I need a background check. Quiet. Nothing traceable." Ray Dominguez had been running intelligence for Ethan for 9 years. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. Name? Lily Harper, Florida, small town called Seagrove, near the coast. She works a seafood shack called Pelicans, and her son, adopted I think, maybe 5 or 6 years old. I need the adoption records, wherever they came from. A pause. How deep? Deep enough to know everything. Fast enough that I have it by tonight. Done. Ethan hung up and sat in his parked car for a long moment, watching a family walk past on the sidewalk. A father, a mother, 2 kids eating ice cream cones. Ordinary, uncomplicated. He drove back to the rental house and waited. Ray called at 8:47 p.m. Lily Harper, 31 years old, born in Savannah, Georgia. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. Mother passed when she was 17. Father's been out of the picture since she was a kid. She's been in Seagrove for about 4 years. Moved here from Atlanta. Ray paused to shuffle something. She's been working the shack since she arrived. Rents a small apartment above a hardware store on Glenwood Street. No romantic partner on record, no social media presence worth mentioning. Clean. The boy, Ethan said. Noah Harper, age 6. Here's where it gets interesting. Another pause, and Ethan recognized that pause. Ray only did it when something genuinely surprised him. She filed for adoption in Georgia about 5 years ago. The boy was found abandoned outside a free clinic in Augusta. No birth certificate with him, no note, nothing. Estimated age at time of discovery, 8 to 10 months. No biological parents ever came forward. No matches in any missing persons database. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. The adoption went through quietly. Ray continued. She'd been fostering him for almost a year before it was finalized. Records show she fought hard for it. The system tried to move him twice to other placements. She refused to let him go. Silence. Ethan. Ray's voice dropped slightly. Augusta, Georgia. You know what that means. He did, because 12 years ago, when Daniel disappeared, the last confirmed sighting of him was in Augusta, Georgia, a gas station security camera. After that, nothing. No body ever recovered, no trace. If Daniel had survived whatever happened to him, even briefly, if he'd had a child before the end. That's all I've got for now, Ray said carefully. You want me to go further? Yes, Ethan said. Find out if there's any DNA in the abandoned child file from Georgia DFCS, and pull everything you have on Daniel's last known movements again. Cross-reference. I'll have it by morning? Ethan set the phone down. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, Seagrove was settling into its quiet nighttime rhythm. Porch lights coming on, a dog barking somewhere down the street. The distant sound of the ocean, always present here, like a second heartbeat under everything. He thought about a boy of 8 months, left outside a clinic in Augusta. No name, no record, no one coming back for him. He thought about Daniel at 19, young, reckless, and caught in the middle of a war Ethan himself had started. He thought about a crescent-shaped birthmark that appeared in exactly one place in his entire family's history. It wasn't coincidence. Ethan didn't believe in coincidences. Not in his world, not in any world. Every detail meant something. Every thread connected to something else if you pulled it long enough. He just didn't know yet what he was about to unravel. But he would. And whatever it was, whoever was responsible for a child being abandoned in a Georgia parking lot, he would find that out too. Some answers, he was now certain, were long overdue. Ethan had a rule about keeping distance. In his world, closeness was a liability. The more someone knew you, really knew you, the more damage they could do. It was a lesson he'd learned young and never forgotten. So he kept walls, tall ones, and he'd gotten so good at it that most days he didn't even notice they were there. Today, he was about to walk straight through one. He told himself it was strategic. He needed to get closer to Noah without raising alarm, and the only way to do that was through Lily. He needed to be calm, unremarkable, forgettable, just another quiet stranger passing through a beach town. He'd played more convincing roles in far more dangerous rooms. This was just information gathering. He almost believed it. He walked into the shack at 11, just before the lunch rush. This time, he sat at the counter instead of a corner table, more exposed, but deliberate. Easier to talk, harder to ignore. Lily appeared from the kitchen, saw him, and there was a brief flicker of recognition before her professional expression clicked back into place. "Coffee?" she asked. "Please." She poured it without looking at him, moving with that same efficient economy he'd noticed yesterday. Up close, she was different from what he'd catalogued from a distance. The tiredness was still there, but so was something sharper. An alertness behind her eyes that didn't quite match the quiet diner setting, like someone who'd learned a long time ago to pay attention. "You were here yesterday," she said. Not accusing, just observant. "Good coffee," Ethan said simply. The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close enough. She set the pot down and slid a menu toward him. "Kitchen does a good grouper sandwich if you're staying for lunch." "I'll take one." She wrote it down and moved away. Ethan wrapped both hands around the mug and looked around the diner. Noah was at his usual table near the kitchen. Same coloring book, different page, same focused expression. Today he had a small toy truck beside him that he kept moving in slow circles while he colored, as if the truck was patrolling the edges of the book. Ethan watched him for exactly 3 seconds, then looked away. The lunch crowd filtered in gradually. Lily worked the room with practiced efficiency. 2 other tables, the counter, the kitchen window. She never stopped moving. Ethan stayed on his stool, ate the grouper sandwich, which was genuinely excellent, and waited for a natural opening. It came when a water glass near his elbow got knocked over. His fault, a rare moment of carelessness, and Lily appeared immediately with a cloth, cleaning it up before he could even react. "Don't worry about it," she said. "Sorry, long morning." She glanced at him briefly. "Vacation?" "Something like that." "You don't look like someone on vacation." He raised an eyebrow. "What do I look like?" She considered him for a moment with those careful brown eyes. "Someone who came here to avoid thinking about something and is thinking about it anyway." It was so accurate that Ethan had no response, which was itself a kind of answer. Lily seemed to realize she'd said something unexpectedly direct because she straightened and moved to clear a plate from the next stool. "Sorry, that was accurate," he said. She glanced back at him. This time, the almost smile became an actual one. Small, brief, like it surprised her, too. "Lily," she said, and extended a hand across the counter. "Ethan." They shook hands once, firm, brief, and then she was gone again, moving back into the rhythm of the lunch service. It wasn't much, but it was a door opening, and Ethan had spent 15 years knowing exactly how to walk through doors. By mid-afternoon, the diner had emptied. Ethan had ordered a second coffee he didn't need and was reading nothing on his phone when Noah appeared at the counter 2 stools down and climbed up with the focused effort of someone scaling a mountain. He looked at Ethan with the direct, unfiltered curiosity that only children under 7 are capable of. "You were on the beach," Noah said. "I bumped into you." "You did," Ethan confirmed. "Sorry again." "Already forgotten." Noah seemed satisfied with this. He pulled his toy truck from his pocket and set it on the counter, running it back and forth along the edge. Ethan said nothing. Noah didn't seem to need him to. After a minute, "Do you live here?" "No, just visiting." "Where do you live?" "Chicago." Noah considered this with great seriousness. "Is it cold there?" "Very." "I don't like cold." He said it like a formal position, a policy decision. "Neither did my brother," Ethan said, and then stopped. He hadn't planned to say that. It came out on its own, unprompted, from somewhere he'd had locked for 12 years. Noah looked up from his truck. "You have a brother?" A beat. "Had." The boy seemed to process this quietly, in the way that children sometimes understand loss more simply than adults do. He didn't ask what happened. He just nodded once, slowly, and went back to rolling the truck along the counter. Then, without looking up, "I don't have a brother either. It's just me and Mom." Ethan looked at the side of the boy's face. The dark hair, the way he held the truck. Left hand, fingers wrapped loosely, the crescent mark just barely visible beneath his sleeve. Something in Ethan's chest moved. He couldn't name it, so he ignored it. "She works hard," Ethan said, nodding toward where Lily had disappeared into the kitchen. "She always works hard," Noah said matter-of-factly. "She says that's how we keep our apartment." He looked up again. "She says hard work is the only thing nobody can take away from you." Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, "She's right." He went to the pier that evening. It was a long, weathered structure that stretched out over the water at the south end of the beach, half its lights dead, planks worn smooth by years of salt and footsteps. He stood at the far end, the ocean moving dark and heavy beneath him, and he opened the file Ray had sent that morning. The cross-reference was incomplete. Georgia DFCS records were sealed tighter than he'd hoped, and pulling DNA from a closed case without a court order would take time he'd have to manufacture carefully. But Ray had found one thing. Daniel's last confirmed location in Augusta placed him less than 2 miles from the clinic where Noah was found. And the timeline, accounting for the estimated age of the child at abandonment, pointed to a window that matched exactly. Ethan stood at the end of the pier for a long time. The wind came off the water cold and sharp. Below him, the waves hit the pylons with a rhythm that didn't care about any of this. He thought about a boy rolling a toy truck along a diner counter, telling him that hard work was the only thing nobody could take away from you. He thought about Daniel, young and reckless and never careful enough. He thought about the fact that somewhere, someone had known Daniel had a son and had said nothing, done nothing, let a baby be left outside a clinic with no name and no history. That thought didn't sit quietly. It burned. The call came at 6 a.m. Ethan was already awake. He'd been awake since 4, sitting at the kitchen table with Daniel's old missing persons file spread open in front of him. Photographs, timelines, dead-end reports, pages he'd read so many times the edges had gone soft. He answered on the first ring. "We have a problem," Ray said. No preamble. That alone told Ethan it was serious. Ray always had preamble. "Talk." "Someone ran a ghost inquiry on Daniel's file through a back-channel network in Chicago last night. Whoever it was, they were good. They almost buried the trace, but not good enough." Ray paused. The inquiry originated from a proxy server tied to the Russo family. The name landed in Ethan's chest like a stone dropped into still water. The Russos. He hadn't heard that name spoken seriously in 3 years. Sal Russo had been a ghost since the last territorial agreement was signed. Quiet, contained, supposedly retired. His operation had pulled back from Chicago almost entirely, fading into the background noise of a dozen smaller criminal enterprises spread across the Southeast. Ethan had let himself believe they were done, neutralized. A chapter closed. "What exactly did they pull?" he asked. His voice was entirely flat now. the tone that his men recognized as the one that came before something irreversible. Everything connected to Daniel's last known movements: Augusta, the timeline, the abandoned child case. Ray's voice dropped. "Ethan, they knew before you did. Or they've been sitting on this information for a long time, and your background check on Lily triggered their system." The silence stretched. "They killed him," Ethan said. Not a question. He'd suspected it for years, suspected the Russos were involved in Daniel's disappearance, but suspicion and confirmation were two entirely different countries. "I think so," Ray said carefully. "And I think they've known about the child for years. They just didn't know where he was. Until now. Until now." Ethan stood up slowly from the table. He walked to the window. The Florida morning was already bright and warm outside, absurdly peaceful, the kind of day that had no business existing alongside the conversation he was having. "They sent people?" "Two men left Atlanta by car last night. I picked them up on highway surveillance about 4 hours ago. They're heading south." Ray hesitated. "They'll be in Seagrove by noon, Ethan." He checked his watch. 6 hours. Why does a child matter to them? He asked, though part of him already knew. Ray answered anyway. "Because of the Whitfield territory. You remember the agreement your father made with the Whitfield faction before he died? The one that gave the Russos access to the port routes as long as there was no direct coal heir challenging it?" A beat. Daniel was named in that agreement as a secondary heir. If he had a son, a biological son, that child has a legal claim under the original terms. Not a criminal claim. An actual contract claim that could be enforced through every back-channel lawyer in Chicago. "Noah," Ethan said quietly, "if he's Daniel's son, he's worth more than a birthmark to the Russo family. He's a loose end with a legal face." Ray's voice was grim. "They can't afford to let him exist." Ethan was already moving. Phone to his shoulder, pulling on his jacket, mind arranging pieces at a speed that had nothing to do with panic and everything to do with the coldly efficient machine he became when the situation demanded it. "How many men do you have in reach?" he asked. "2 in Tampa. I can have them in Seagrove in 90 minutes. "Send them. I need them on Lily Harper's apartment building and the shack. Observation only. Nothing visible, nothing that draws attention." He pulled his car keys from the counter. "And Ray, this doesn't leave us. Nobody in Chicago knows where I am or why." "Understood." Another hesitation. "Ethan, be careful how you handle this. If the Russos find out you're personally involved, then they'll know exactly what they've started." He ended the call. Back in Chicago, in a steel and glass office tower that had nothing criminal written anywhere on its exterior, Victor Russo sat behind a desk the size of a dining table and read the report his man had placed in front of him. Victor was 63. Gray-haired, thick-necked, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now just heavy. He'd run the Russo operation quietly for 15 years. Quietly being the operative word. His philosophy was simple. Loud men got indicted. Quiet men got rich. He read the report twice. Then he set it down and looked at the man standing across from him. "Ethan Cole is in Seagrove," he said. "Yes. And the child is there. With the mother, a waitress. Nobody." The man shifted his weight. "It looks like Cole only found the boy 2 days ago. He's still piecing it together." Victor tapped one finger on the desk. Slow, rhythmic. "Daniel Cole was a problem we solved 12 years ago," he said. "A loose end that got cleaned up. This," he tapped the report, "is what happens when you don't confirm a body." A silence. "Send Carver and Mills," Victor said. "Tell them to keep it clean. No noise, no headlines, no bodies that can be traced." He paused. "And if Ethan Cole gets in the way, he will," the man said. Victor looked up. "Then he becomes part of the solution too." He stood, buttoning his jacket. I didn't build 30 years of clean record by leaving doors open. Close this one. Ethan reached the diner at 8:30. The breakfast service was just thinning out. He took his usual stool, ordered coffee he didn't touch, and watched Lily work the room with the controlled urgency of a woman managing too much alone. He noticed the things he hadn't let himself notice before. The shadows beneath her eyes that no amount of efficiency could hide. The way she checked on Noah every few minutes, a glance, a small touch on his shoulder as she passed, with the quiet, constant vigilance of someone who had learned that the people you love could disappear without warning. She'd learned that lesson somewhere. He wondered how. When she refilled his coffee, he looked up and said quietly, "Is there anyone else who lives with you? Family nearby?" She paused, studied him with those careful eyes. "That's an odd question for a Tuesday morning. Humor me." "No," she said slowly. "It's just us. Always has been." She set the coffee pot down. "Why?" He held her gaze for a moment, long enough to make a decision he couldn't take back. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Not here, not now, but soon." He kept his voice low and completely steady. "Today, don't walk home alone with Noah. Stay in public places. Can you do that?" Lily stared at him. The professional warmth drained from her expression, replaced by something older and more instinctive. "You're scaring me." "Good," he said quietly. "You should be paying attention." He left cash on the counter and walked out into the Florida morning. 4 hours until the Russo men arrived in Seagrove, and a woman who had no idea that the peaceful life she'd built was already in someone else's crosshairs. She'd spent the previous afternoon doing exactly what he said. Lily didn't know why she'd listened to a stranger. She'd asked herself that question approximately 40 times between Tuesday morning and Wednesday night. She didn't know this man, didn't know his last name, didn't know where he was staying, didn't know why a quiet man with expensive shoes and watchful eyes would walk into her diner and tell her to be afraid. But she'd listened anyway. There was something in the way he said it. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just flat and certain, the way someone speaks when they're reporting a fact rather than creating a feeling. And Lily had spent enough years reading people across a diner counter to know the difference between someone performing urgency and someone genuinely carrying it. So she'd stayed in public, she'd walked home with the evening crowd still on the street, she'd locked her door and checked it twice, and then checked it again at midnight when Noah had a bad dream and she was already sitting up in the dark, not sleeping, listening to the building around her. By Wednesday morning, she was tired and frustrated and ready for answers. He walked into the shack at 9. "Tonight," she said before he could sit down, "you're going to tell me what's going on. Tonight." He looked at her for a moment, then, "Okay." He came to her apartment at 7. Noah was in bed by 8:30 most nights. A firm, non-negotiable routine that Lily protected with the seriousness of a court order. So at 7, with Noah fed and bathed and 20 minutes into a picture book, Ethan sat at Lily's small kitchen table and put 3 things on it: a photograph, a document, and a folded piece of paper with a handwritten timeline on it. Lily sat across from him with her arms crossed and her jaw set. The posture of someone who has already decided to be skeptical, who has pre-built the wall before the conversation begins. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said. "I'm from Chicago, and I think the boy you adopted 5 years ago is my nephew." The kitchen was very quiet. Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "Excuse me." He slid the photograph across the table. "My younger brother, Daniel Cole. This was taken when he was 16. She looked down at it without touching it. Dark hair, brown eyes. A boy caught mid-laugh with his left arm resting on a railing, a distinct, crescent-shaped birthmark visible on his wrist. The color shifted slightly in her face, but she didn't reach for the photo. "Birthmarks aren't DNA," she said. "No, they're not." He slid the document over. "This is Daniel's last confirmed location before he disappeared 12 years ago. A gas station in Augusta, Georgia, 2 miles from the clinic where Noah was found." She looked at the document this time, really looked at it. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. He watched her processing it, watched the careful skepticism working hard against something she didn't want to feel. "Lots of people are in Augusta," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "He was 19, Ethan said quietly. "He disappeared during a dangerous period. People I was in conflict with wanted leverage over me. The easiest leverage was always the people closest to me." He paused. "I've believed for 12 years that Daniel was dead. I never found a body. I looked for 2 years, and then I had to stop because it was going to bury me too." Lily's arms were still crossed, but her hands had tightened. He slid the timeline across. Noah's estimated age at abandonment, the clinic date, Daniel's last known location, the distances, the dates. He let her read it. Then, "I'm not asking you to believe me based on a feeling. I'm asking you to look at what lines up." The silence stretched long enough to become its own kind of pressure. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. Her voice was different now, quieter and, because of that, more dangerous. "In Seagrove. Why here, why now? Did you come looking for him?" "No." He met her eyes. "I came here to disappear for a while. Things went wrong in Chicago. I came to this beach because I needed somewhere that wasn't Chicago." He held her gaze. "I met Noah by accident. I saw the birthmark by accident. Everything after that was me trying to figure out if I was losing my mind." She stared at him. Looking for the lie, he knew. Searching the way careful people search. Not just the words, but the space around the words. "And are you?" she asked. "Losing your mind?" "No." Another silence. She unfolded her arms slowly and reached for the timeline. Read it again, more carefully this time. He watched something working behind her eyes. The math of it, the geography of it, the uncomfortable way the pieces aligned without being forced. She set it down. "Even if this is true," she said, and her voice was controlled but tight at the edges. "Even if Noah is, what does that mean? What do you want?" "Right now, to keep him safe." From what? He'd thought about how much to tell her. He'd constructed a version of the truth that was manageable, edited, contained, something that would inform without overwhelming. But then he thought about those careful brown eyes. About a woman who checked her door twice at midnight and still didn't sleep. About someone who had fought the foster system twice to keep a child nobody else came back for. She deserved the full weight of it. "There are people in Chicago," he said, "who have known about Noah longer than I have. People who are threatened by his existence for reasons that would take an hour to fully explain." He kept his voice even. "Those people sent men to Seagrove. Yesterday." The blood drained from her face. "What?" "They're here to make sure Noah never becomes a problem for them." He said it plainly because softening it would only cost them time. "I had men watching your building last night. Nothing happened. They were likely positioning, getting familiar with the area. But tonight, tomorrow, I don't know their exact timeline." Lily stood up. Her chair scraped back and she moved away from the table, pressing both hands against the kitchen counter, her back to him, breathing through whatever was hitting her. He gave her the silence. After a long moment, she turned around. Her eyes were bright. Not tears, not yet. Something harder than tears. "Noah is 6 years old," she said. "He has a nightlight with stars on it, and he can't eat cereal unless it's exactly the right kind, and he still sleeps with a stuffed bear that's missing one eye." Her voice didn't shake, but it wanted to. "He is not a problem for anyone. He's a little boy." "I know," Ethan said. "Then fix it." The words came out fierce and quiet. "Whatever world you come from, whatever you started, you fix it." Before he could respond, headlights swept slowly across the apartment window. Ethan was on his feet before the light had passed, moving to the wall beside the window, angling to see without being seen. A dark sedan, moving at the pace of something with no destination. It passed the building, reached the end of the block, and didn't turn. It circled back. His jaw tightened. He turned to Lily. "Pack a bag. 10 minutes. Only what Noah absolutely needs." She stared at him. "Lily?" His voice was low and absolutely calm. "The car outside has been past this building 3 times in the last hour. I need you to trust me right now. Not because you know me, but because I am the only person standing between your son and people who do not care that he has a stuffed bear." The longest 5 seconds of silence he'd ever sat inside. Then she moved. Noah thought it was an adventure. That was the only mercy in all of it, that a 6-year-old boy, pulled from his bed at 9:30 at night and bundled into a stranger's car with his backpack and his one-eyed bear, could look at the dark highway, unspooling ahead of them, and feel something close to excitement rather than fear. "Are we going somewhere with a pool?" he asked from the back seat, approximately 11 minutes into the drive. "Maybe," Ethan said. "I can't actually swim yet, but I'm learning." A pause. "Mom says I'm brave in the water." "She's right," Ethan said. Lily, in the passenger seat, said nothing. She was sitting very straight, with her bag on her lap, and her eyes on the side mirror, watching the road behind them with a focus that had nothing to do with pools or bravery. Ethan had moved them out through the building's back stairwell, avoiding the street entirely. His car, a dark, unremarkable rental, was parked in the lot behind the hardware store. They were on the highway heading north within 8 minutes of her packing the bag. He'd texted Ray one word. Moving. Ray would handle the Tampa men, would redirect surveillance, would begin quietly muddying their trail through whatever digital channels the Russos might be monitoring. What Ray couldn't do was sit in this car and manage the silence between 2 adults who were essentially strangers, held together by a child in the back seat who didn't know his life had just changed directions. Noah fell asleep somewhere in southern Alabama, the bear tucked under his chin, his breathing gone slow and even. The highway was empty this late, long, flat stretches of darkness broken by the occasional overpass light or distant truck. Ethan drove at exactly the speed limit. Nothing to attract attention, everything deliberate. Lily spoke first, quietly so Noah wouldn't wake. "How long have you known they were in Seagrove?" "Since Tuesday morning," Ethan said. "My contact traced a surveillance inquiry back to the Russo family. They were already moving before I could verify everything." "And you waited 2 days to tell me?" "It wasn't a question. It was an accounting." "I needed to know how much danger you were actually in before I frightened you over a possibility," he said. By Wednesday night, it wasn't a possibility anymore. Lily turned to look at him in the dark. "You should have told me Tuesday." "Yes," he said. No argument, no defense. Just the word. She turned back to the window. He could feel her recalibrating. Not forgiving, but filing it. She was the kind of person who collected facts first and felt them later. He recognized it because he did the same thing. "Who are the Russos?" she asked. He gave her the version that was honest without being a complete excavation. A rival criminal organization based out of Chicago. A long territorial conflict going back decades. Daniel had been caught in the middle of it, young, loyal, and in the wrong place at the wrong time. "He disappeared 12 years ago," Ethan said. "I never found out exactly what happened to him. I suspected the Russos, but I couldn't prove it. He paused. When my contact told me they'd pulled Daniel's file and that the inquiry included the Augusta abandonment records, I understood that they'd known about Noah for a long time, maybe years. They just didn't know where he was. "Until your background check on me," Lily said. "Yes." Another silence. The highway passed under them in a steady, dark ribbon. "So your search for the truth about Noah is what put him in danger," she said. Not cruel, just precise. "Yes," he said again, because it was true, and she deserved to hear him say it without flinching. She exhaled through her nose, looked at her hands on her back. "Okay," she said quietly. Not absolution, just the sound of someone choosing to move forward instead of backward, because backward had a dark sedan circling the block. The safe house was a property Ray kept under a shell company in rural Bibb County. A farmhouse set back from a dirt road, surrounded by enough tree cover to disappear from satellite view. Clean, stocked, and as far from Seagrove as Ethan had wanted them to be in the hours available to him. They arrived just past 2 a.m. Ethan carried Noah inside without waking him. The boy stirred once, murmured something that might have been a question, then settled back into sleep against Ethan's shoulder with the absolute trust that only the deeply unconscious can manage. Ethan stood in the small bedroom doorway for a moment after laying him down, longer than was necessary. Lily noticed. She didn't say anything. In the kitchen, she made tea because it gave her hands something to do, and Ethan sat at the table and let the farmhouse settle around them. The creak of old wood, the sound of trees, the profound rural silence that was completely different from the ocean silence of Seagrove. "Tell me about him," Lily said. She set a mug in front of him. "Daniel." He looked at the mug for a moment. "He was 9 years younger than me," Ethan said. "Which meant by the time I was building something, building the wrong thing, but building it, he was a teenager watching me do it." He turned the mug slowly. "He thought I was impressive. That's the worst part. I was exactly the wrong kind of role model. And he looked at me like I was something worth becoming." Lily sat down, said nothing, let him continue. He was smart, genuinely smart, not street smart, book smart. He could have gone to college, could have built something legitimate. I had enough money by then to send him anywhere he wanted. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. But he wanted to be close to what I was doing. He wanted to be useful to me. And I let him get close because I liked having him around. A pause. That was my mistake, letting someone I cared about get close to something that destroys everything it touches. The farmhouse was very quiet around the confession. One day, he was there, Ethan said. The next, he wasn't. No warning, no body, no note. Just gone. He looked up. I've been running the same loop for 12 years. Wondering what I missed. Wondering if I'd made one different decision, whether he'd still be here. Lily held her mug with both hands. Her expression had shifted. The wariness was still there, but something else had come alongside it. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked. People don't usually answer honest questions honestly. I'm tired, he said simply, of the alternative. She studied him across the table. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone who'd be harder to feel sorry for. He almost smiled. Almost. Don't feel sorry for me, he said. I built everything that led to this. She looked down at her tea. Then quietly, but Noah didn't. No, Ethan said. He didn't. 300 miles south, Carver and Mills sat in a parked car outside an empty apartment building and made a call. They're gone, Carver said. Moved in the last few hours. The woman and the kid, both gone. Victor Russo's voice came back cold and flat. Find them. We'll need to pull movement data. Highway cameras. I don't care what you need to pull, Victor said. Find them. The call ended. Carver looked at Mills, started the engine. The farmhouse had a particular kind of quiet in the early mornings. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that sits too still, that has too much space in it, that makes you aware of every sound the trees make and every car that passes too slowly on the distant road. Ethan had been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with his phone and a cold cup of coffee, monitoring the 3 separate alert systems Ray had set up around the property perimeter. 2 days had passed without incident. That was the part that bothered him. In his experience, silence from an enemy wasn't safety. It was preparation. Noah had decided, with the unilateral confidence of a 6-year-old, that the farmhouse was the best place he'd ever been. There were trees to examine, and a porch with a swing and a tool shed, with rusty, interesting things in it that Lily kept steering him away from. He found a frog on the second morning and spent 40 minutes trying to convince Ethan to let him keep it in a jar, making a series of arguments that were, objectively, quite reasonable for someone his age. "He could eat flies," Noah said, holding the jar up at eye level. "We have flies. It works for everyone." "The frog would disagree," Ethan said. "How do you know what frogs think?" "Experience." Noah squinted at him with deep suspicion. "You don't know anything about frogs." "That's fair," Ethan said. Lily, standing in the porch doorway with her coffee, watched the exchange with an expression Ethan couldn't fully read, something between amusement and a feeling that looked like it needed more time to understand itself. They let the frog go eventually. Noah gave it a formal farewell, but the easy moments were always shorter than the hard ones. That afternoon, while Noah napped, Lily sat across from Ethan on the porch and said what she'd been holding since the kitchen conversation 2 nights ago. "I need to know what happens after," she said. "Not the immediate after, the real after. If you deal with these people, if the threat goes away. What does that mean for Noah?" She kept her voice even. "Does he become a target again next year? In 5 years, is this the life he has now because of what he is?" Ethan had asked himself the same question every hour since he'd confirmed who Noah likely was. "I'm going to dismantle the parts of my operation that create the exposure," he said. "The Russo conflict exists because of territorial claims tied to my family's history. I can eliminate the legal basis of their threat, liquidate the holdings, dissolve the agreements, make Noah worthless to them strategically. Can you actually do that?" "Yes." "And you'd do that." "I'm already making calls." He met her eyes. "But I need to end this first, cleanly. If I let the Russos walk away from this, they'll find another angle. They always do." Lily was quiet for a moment. "End it how?" He held her gaze and didn't answer, because the answer would cost something between them that he wasn't ready to lose yet. She understood anyway. Her expression didn't change dramatically, just settled into something resigned and complicated. "I want Noah nowhere near whatever that looks like," she said. "He won't be. You have my word. Your word." She said it carefully, not mockingly, testing its weight. "Okay?" A pause. "For what it's worth, your word has held so far." The alert came at 11:47 that night, a single vibration on Ethan's phone. The outer perimeter sensor, east side of the property, where the tree line met the dirt road. He was off the couch and moving before the second vibration came. He went to the bedroom door first. Knocked twice, quietly. Lily appeared within seconds. She'd been barely sleeping. He could tell by how quickly she moved. "Get Noah," he said. His voice was completely level. "Bathroom, interior wall, no windows. Stay on the floor, stay quiet." Her eyes went wide, but she didn't hesitate. She disappeared into Noah's room. Ethan moved through the farmhouse with the lights off, navigating from memory. He'd walked every room, measured every sightline on the first day. Another old habit, automatic as breathing. He retrieved the handgun from the kitchen cabinet, where he'd stored it when they arrived, checked the chamber, and positioned himself at the front window. 2 figures, moving through the tree line at the eastern edge of the property, crossing toward the farmhouse in a wide arc. Tactical approach. 1 flanking left toward the back, 1 coming direct. Professionals, not panicked, not rushed, Carver and Mills, he assumed. He thought briefly about Ray's men. The 2 from Tampa he'd pulled off Seagrove surveillance and redirected here 2 days ago. They'd been positioned at the road entrance, a quarter-mile out. He texted Ray, "Compromised, 2 on property." Then he moved to the back door. What happened in the next 4 minutes happened fast. The man coming around the back of the farmhouse, Mills, as it turned out, a contract man from Atlanta, came through the back door 30 seconds after Ethan had moved away from it. He was good. Fast, quiet, certain. But Ethan was already in the shadow behind the door when it opened. The confrontation was brutal and brief, the kind that happens in dark spaces between people who both know what they're doing, where there's no ceremony and no hesitation. Ethan subdued him with the hard efficiency of someone who'd learned to fight in rooms exactly like this one, and Mills went down without firing a shot. Carver was different. He came through the front window. Not the door, the window, which told Ethan he was experienced enough to avoid the predictable entry point. Glass came in fast and loud, and Carver was firing before he'd fully cleared the frame. The first shot went wide, the second punched through the kitchen wall, 6 inches from where Ethan had been standing 2 seconds earlier. The exchange lasted 11 seconds. 4 shots total, 2 from each side. Ethan took a graze along his left forearm, a burning line of pain he registered and filed away immediately. Carver took a shot to the shoulder that put him on the floor. When the farmhouse went quiet again, Ethan stood in the center of the living room in the dark, breathing steadily, and took stock. Both men down. Neither dead. He'd been precise about that. He needed them conscious. He needed to know how much Victor Russo knew about where they'd run. He pulled out his phone, called Ray. "Send the Tampa men in. I need cleanup and a medical kit. And get me a secure transport by morning. We can't stay here." Then he walked to the bathroom door and knocked 3 times. "It's over," he said. "You're safe." A long pause from inside. The door opened. Noah was sitting on the bathroom floor, with his bear pressed against his chest, eyes wide and very awake, every trace of the adventurous 6-year-old temporarily replaced by something smaller and more frightened. He looked up at Ethan and said nothing. Lily stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder. She looked at the torn sleeve of Ethan's jacket, at the blood running in a slow line down his forearm, and her face did something complicated and unresolved. She stepped past Ethan without a word, went to the kitchen, and came back with the first aid kit she'd noticed on the second shelf 2 days ago. She sat him down at the table and began working on his arm with hands that were only slightly unsteady. Noah, still holding his bear, climbed onto the chair beside Ethan and leaned against his arm, the uninjured one, without saying anything. Ethan went completely still. He couldn't remember the last time someone had leaned against him without wanting something. "Does it hurt?" Noah asked quietly. "Not much," Ethan said. Noah considered this. "You were scared, though, right?" Ethan looked down at the top of the boy's dark head. "Yeah," he said. "A little." It was the first honest answer he'd given, without calculating at first. Lily's hands paused briefly on his arm. Then she continued. Outside, the Alabama trees stood dark and indifferent, and 2 men lay on the farmhouse floor with enough information in them to lead Ethan straight to Victor Russo. The running was over. Now it was time to finish it. Carver talked. They always did, eventually. Not because Ethan threatened him, not because of anything dramatic, simply because Carver was a contract man, not a loyalist. He had no ideology to protect, no family honor to defend. He had a job that had gone badly wrong, a shoulder that needed a hospital, and a man sitting across from him who hadn't killed him when he easily could have. The math wasn't complicated. By 4 a.m, Ethan had everything he needed. Victor Russo was in New Orleans, had been for 3 weeks, running a secondary operation out of a converted warehouse near the River District, while Chicago remained deliberately quiet. He had 8 men with him. He believed Ethan was still reactive, still playing defense, still running. That was his mistake. Ethan had stopped running the moment Noah leaned against his arm in the Alabama farmhouse. He arranged Lily and Noah's protection first. That was non-negotiable. Ray had a contact in Baton Rouge, a former federal marshal named Bridget Hale, who now ran private security with the kind of discretion that money couldn't buy, but trust could. Ethan had earned that trust 6 years ago by staying out of something that was none of his business. Bridget owed him a conversation, and a conversation was all he needed. She took the job without asking too many questions. Before they separated, Lily pulled him aside in the early morning gray while Noah sat on the porch steps, eating a piece of toast, deliberately not looking at them the way children do when they know the adult conversation is about them. "How long?" she asked. 48 hours, Ethan said. "Maybe less." She studied his face. She'd been doing that more, reading him with the same careful attention she gave the diner room, cataloging details, looking for the thing behind the thing. "And if it doesn't go the way you plan?" "Bridget has instructions," he said. "Financial account set up. Documentation for you and Noah that makes you both disappear cleanly. You'd never have to think about any of this again." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her, really looked. Not the clinical observation of the first few days, but something more direct, something that cost more. "I'm not planning to lose," he said. "Nobody plans to." "No," he agreed, "but some people are better prepared for the alternative than others." He paused. "I have been doing this for a long time, Lily. I'm very good at the parts of it that I'm not proud of." She was quiet for a moment. Then she did something he didn't expect. She reached out and straightened the collar of his jacket, a small, practical gesture that had no explanation beyond the fact that she made it. "Come back," she said. Quietly, like it was a simple request and not the most complicated thing anyone had said to him in years. He nodded once, walked to the car. Behind him, Noah called out, "Ethan." He turned. The boy was still on the porch steps, toast in one hand, Bear inexplicably present in the other. He looked at Ethan with those serious brown eyes and said, "Be careful of the bad guys." "I will," Ethan said. "And come back," Noah added. "We didn't finish talking about the frog." Ethan stood there for one unguarded second, the wall he'd spent 15 years building, doing absolutely nothing to stop what moved through him in that moment. "We'll finish the conversation," he said. Then he got in the car and drove toward New Orleans. He used himself as bait. It was the cleanest option. Not the safest, but the one most likely to produce the result he needed. Victor Russo was a careful man who didn't make appointments. The only way to get him in a room was to make him want to be there badly enough to override the caution. So Ethan sent a message through the back channels that still connected their worlds. Clean, simple, impossible to ignore. "I know what you did to Daniel. I have the evidence. We meet and I disappear, or I don't, and Chicago burns. Your choice. The warehouse. Tomorrow night." Victor responded in 2 hours. Tomorrow. Midnight. Ray had people in New Orleans by morning. 6 men positioned around the warehouse district, covering every exit route, every vehicle approach. Not enough to storm the building, enough to seal it. Ethan walked in alone, which was the point. The warehouse was a cavernous, rust-boned building on the river's edge, The kind of place that had stopped being useful for legitimate purposes 20 years ago and had found new ones since. High ceilings, loading bays on the east wall, catwalks overhead, 3 levels of shadow above the single pool of light someone had set up in the center of the floor. Classic intimidation staging. Ethan had set up rooms like this himself. Victor Russo stood in the light, with 4 men around him, 2 more visible on the catwalk above. He looked exactly like the photograph in Ethan's files. Older, heavier, but the same calculated stillness in the eyes. The eyes of someone who'd always had other people do the hard things and had told himself for so long that this made him clean that he'd actually started to believe it. "You look tired, Cole," Victor said. "You look like a man who just realized he made a mistake," Ethan said. Victor smiled, patient. "You came alone." "That's what it looks like." The smile didn't move. "You sent a message about evidence. I'll be honest, I don't believe you have anything worth worrying about. I think you're a man who built his entire empire on personal loyalty, and that loyalty collapsed around him, and now he's standing in a warehouse trying to look like he still has cards to play." "Daniel was 19, Ethan said. Victor's expression shifted. Barely, a millimeter, but Ethan had been watching faces in rooms like this for 15 years. "He came to you," Ethan continued. "I know that now. He came to you, not to me, because I'd let him get too far into things he shouldn't have been near, and he was in trouble, and he didn't want me to know how much. He trusted you to help him." His voice didn't rise, didn't shake. "And you killed him." The warehouse was very still. "He was going to talk," Victor said. "Not a confession, a justification." The tone of a man who had long ago reclassified murder as management. He knew too much about the port agreements. He would have destroyed everything. "He was my brother." 3 words. No theater. Just wait. Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. The small, almost imperceptible signal that Ethan had been watching for. And his men moved. What Victor didn't know was that Ethan's signal had come 60 seconds earlier. The warehouse doors sealed simultaneously. Every exit, every bay door. Ray's men outside. Inside, the 2 additional people Ethan had moved into position the previous night, tucked into the loading bay shadows, with a patience that came from being very well paid. What followed was not a long fight. Long fights were for people who hadn't prepared. In 7 controlled, precise minutes, the kind that would never be described in a courtroom because no one in that room had any interest in courtrooms, it was over. Victor Russo sat on the warehouse floor, zip-tied, 2 of his men down, the rest persuaded to make different decisions about their evening. Ethan crouched to his level. "My brother had a son," he said quietly. "He's 6 years old. He has a stuffed bear with 1 eye, and he's learning to swim, and he can't eat the wrong cereal." He held Victor's gaze. "That child is going to grow up without knowing a single thing about any of this. He's going to have a normal life, with a mother who fought like hell for him." He stood, "And every agreement, every contract, every territorial claim that makes him a target, I'm dissolving it. All of it, by the end of the week." He straightened his jacket. "Victor Russo," he said, "is done." He walked to the warehouse door, which opened before he reached it. Behind him, Ray stepped out of the shadows. The river outside was dark and wide and moving. Ethan stood at the edge of the dock for exactly 1 minute. Then he called Lily. She picked up on the second ring. He didn't say much, just, "It's over, I'm coming back." A long exhale on her end. Then, quiet and certain, "Noah saved you a piece of toast." For the first time in 4 days, maybe longer, something in Ethan Cole's chest unlocked. He walked to his car. The dismantling took 4 days. Not the violence. that was over in a warehouse on a New Orleans riverbank. The dismantling Ethan was doing now was quieter, slower, and in many ways, harder. It required sitting across from lawyers instead of enemies. It required signatures instead of confrontations. It required looking at 15 years of carefully constructed power and methodically taking it apart, piece by piece, with the same precision he'd used to build it. He was back in Chicago by Thursday morning, first time in 3 weeks. The city looked exactly the same. That was the strange part. He'd expected it to feel different, the way places feel different after you've been through something that changes your internal geography. But Chicago didn't care. The lake was still gray and enormous, the skyline still indifferent, the streets still full of people moving through their lives with no idea what happened in the buildings above them. Ethan sat in his office on the 14th floor and worked for 3 days without stopping. He dissolved the Whitfield territorial agreements through a series of legal instruments that his attorneys had spent years pretending didn't exist. He liquidated the holdings that created exposure, the port contracts, the distribution networks, the shell companies that connected his world to Daniel's world to Noah's world in a chain that someone like Victor Russo could always find a way to pull. He transferred assets into structures that protected Lily and Noah without connecting them to anything that could be traced back to what they'd been part of. Victor Russo, meanwhile, had disappeared into a federal investigation that Ethan had quietly fed with enough documentation to keep him occupied for years. No courtroom drama, no headlines, just a slow, grinding legal process that would consume whatever remained of the Russo operation from the inside out. Ray watched it all happen from his usual careful distance. On the last day, when the final documents were signed and the last call was made, he appeared in the office doorway with 2 glasses and a bottle that had been sitting in Ethan's cabinet since a deal 3 years ago. "That's everything?" Ray asked. "That's everything." Ray poured. Set a glass on the desk. "How does it feel?" Ethan looked around the office, the room he'd worked in for 11 years, the view he'd bought with decisions he couldn't take back. He thought about Daniel at 19, looking at him like he was something worth becoming. "Like I'm about 12 years late," he said. Ray said nothing. He raised his glass. Ethan raised his. They drank in the particular silence of 2 people who had seen too much together to need words for most of it. He drove to Baton Rouge that evening. Bridget Hale had kept Lily and Noah in a clean, comfortable safe house outside the city. A real house, not a farmhouse, with a proper yard and a television and a neighborhood that made noise the way normal neighborhoods do. When Ethan pulled up outside, he could hear, even from the car, the sound of Noah in the backyard making the specific kind of racket that meant he'd found something either alive or potentially dangerous. Lily opened the door before he knocked. She looked at him for a moment, the full, unguarded look of someone who had spent 4 days not knowing whether the person they were looking at would come back. "You look terrible," she said. "4 days of lawyers," he said. "That tracks." She stepped back to let him in. "He's in the yard. He found another frog." "Of course he did." She almost smiled. Almost. But then something more serious moved across her face, and she stopped him in the hallway before he could go through to the yard. "I need to say something before Noah sees you," she said, "because once he sees you, the conversation becomes about frogs." He turned to face her fully. "I've been thinking for 4 days," she said. "About all of it. About what you told me, about what happened in Alabama, about what you went to do in New Orleans." She crossed her arms, not the defensive posture of the diner, but something more considered. "I've been thinking about what I want for Noah and what I want for myself, and whether those 2 things are the same or different." "What did you decide?" "I decided that I spent 6 years building a life that was small on purpose," she said. Not small because I had to. Small because I was protecting him. From anything complicated, anything unpredictable, anything that might reach in and take something away. Her voice was steady, but quiet. And then you walked into a diner and made complicated and unpredictable into something that also saved our lives. Ethan waited. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not," she said. "I'm not asking for explanations or promises you can't keep. I'm saying that if you want to be in his life, really in it, then I want that too." She held his gaze. "On my terms. Slowly, with him knowing the truth about who you are to him when he's old enough to understand it." "On your terms," Ethan said, without question. "And you have to let the frog go," she said. "Every time. I'm not running a frog sanctuary." This time he did smile. A real one, not the controlled, calculated expression he kept for rooms where smiling meant something strategic. Just a smile. "Every time," he agreed. She nodded once. Then she tilted her head toward the back door. Noah saw him from across the yard and dropped everything. He ran the full length of the grass with his arms slightly out at his sides, the way young children run when they're moving at maximum speed, and balance is a secondary concern. And he hit Ethan at approximately the same velocity he'd used on the beach 12 days ago. Ethan caught him. Lifted him without thinking, held him with both arms the way he'd watched Lily do 100 times, and stood in the middle of a Baton Rouge backyard in the last light of a Friday evening, feeling the specific weight of 6 years old pressed against his chest. Noah pulled back just enough to look at him. "You came back." "I said I would." "I knew you would," stated with absolute uncomplicated certainty. "Look." He twisted in Ethan's arms to point at the corner of the yard. "I found another frog. This one's bigger. I think it's the same one from Alabama, but Mom says that's not possible." "Your mom is probably right." Noah considered this. "Maybe it's a cousin." "That's scientifically plausible," Ethan said. Noah nodded, satisfied, and leaned back against him. Ethan felt the small weight settle, the absolute trust of it, the easy certainty. Something he had never built into his world because his world had no use for it. He looked up. Lily was standing in the back doorway, arms folded loosely now, watching them with an expression that had finally, fully, let its guard down. Not completely. That would take time, would take months, would take the slow accumulation of ordinary moments that were the only real currency of trust. But enough. A beginning. The sun was going down behind the tree line, turning the yard gold the way late light does when it has nowhere else to be. 3 weeks later, they were back on the Florida coast. Not Seagrove. Too much history in that particular stretch of sand. A different beach, 40 miles north. Quieter. A place with no associations yet, which meant it could become whatever they made it. Lily had found a better-paying job at a restaurant in the next town over. A real restaurant, with actual hours and an actual salary, because Ethan had quietly ensured that the financial architecture he'd built for them meant she would never again have to choose between rest and rent. She'd pushed back on it, initially, hard. She'd pushed back the way people do when dignity and practicality are fighting each other. He'd let her push back. Then he'd explained it as Daniel's legacy, which was the one framing she couldn't argue with. Money that existed because Noah existed. A father who never got to leave anything to his son, leaving it through the only route still available. She'd accepted it quietly, filed it, felt it later, alone, in the way she did everything large. On the beach, Noah ran straight for the water. He ran the way he did everything. Full speed, total commitment, no hesitation, into the shallow break where the waves came white and foaming over the sand. He shouted something at the ocean that wasn't a word so much as a sound, the pure vocal expression of being 6 years old and alive, and at the edge of something enormous. Ethan stood at the waterline and watched, He wasn't thinking about Chicago. He wasn't thinking about Victor Russo, or the Whitfield agreements, or the 15 years of architecture he'd spent the last week dismantling. He wasn't thinking about the betrayal that had sent him to this coast in the first place. Elena, Marcus, the jagged wreckage of a life he'd thought was solid. He was thinking about Daniel, but differently than he used to. Not with the old grief, the kind that sat like a stone in the chest and never fully dissolved. Something newer, quieter, the kind of remembering that holds someone gently instead of desperately. He left something here, Ethan thought. He didn't get to stay, but he left something. Lily came to stand beside him. Close, but not touching, the particular distance of something new that hasn't yet found its shape. "He's going to go fully under in about 30 seconds, she said. 40, Ethan said. He's building up to it. I'll get the towel. She turned back to their things on the sand. Ethan stayed at the waterline, hands in his pockets, watching Noah negotiate with a wave that was slightly larger than he'd been expecting. The boy stumbled, caught himself, laughed at the ocean like it had made a joke, threw his head back and laughed the full, total, uncalculated laugh of someone who isn't afraid of getting knocked down because getting knocked down is just part of the game. Daniel's laugh. Ethan had heard it once, in a memory so old it had blurred at the edges. But it was there. It was unmistakably, undeniably there. He breathed, for the first time in longer than he could honestly trace. Longer than Elena, longer than the betrayal. Longer maybe than the day Daniel disappeared. The weight he carried was not crushing him. It was just weight, human weight, the kind everyone carries, the kind you carry differently when you're not carrying it alone. Noah turned around, knee-deep in the Atlantic, and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Ethan, the wave got me." "I saw. It was a big one. I know. Are you coming in?" Ethan looked down at his shoes, then at the water, then at the boy standing in it, waiting. He took his shoes off.